A father stood frozen in the doorway, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst through his chest. Through the living room window, he could see his 8-year-old daughter, Maya, sitting on the couch sandwiched between two people who were about to destroy everything he'd built. On one side sat his ex-wife, Rachel, wearing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. On the other side sat a man in an expensive suit, a man the father hadn't seen in 15 years, a man who once meant everything to him. A man named Dominic Hartwell. But what the father didn't know, what none of them knew, was that in just 2 weeks, his daughter would step onto a stage and perform a song that would rip open a secret buried for 15 years. A secret that would change all of their lives forever. This is the story of Elijah Brooks. And this is the story of how one little girl's piano performance exposed the truth that no one was ready to hear. Elijah Brooks had always believed that the past stayed in the past. He'd spent 15 years building that belief brick by brick like a wall around his heart. 15 years of pretending that the most painful moment of his life had somehow made him stronger. 15 years of telling himself that he'd moved on. But now, standing in that doorway, with his work boots still covered in warehouse dust, watching his daughter laugh at something the man in the expensive suit had just said, Elijah realized that some walls weren't strong enough to hold back the flood. Dominic Hartwell. The name alone sent a shiver down his spine. The last time Elijah had seen that face, they'd both been young men with dreams bigger than their circumstances. The last time he'd heard that voice, it had been telling him goodbye in the cruelest way possible. And the last time he'd touched that hand, it had been reaching for his in the darkness of a music practice room before everything fell apart. Now Dominic was a CEO, a tech billionaire. His face had been on the cover of Fortune magazine just last month. And he was sitting in Elijah's tiny apartment next to Elijah's ex-wife, smiling at Elijah's daughter, like he had every right to be there. The thing was, Elijah had written a song about Dominic 15 years ago. A song called When Tomorrow Comes. A song that had poured out of him during the 3 weeks after Dominic walked away, during those endless nights when Elijah couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't do anything but sit at his mother's old piano and let his heartbreak flow through his fingers. He'd never performed that song for anyone, never recorded it, never even written down the lyrics because they were too raw, too honest, too revealing of the feelings he'd been forced to hide from the world. But he'd taught the melody to his daughter 2 months ago, never imagining that she would fall in love with it, never dreaming that she would ask to perform it at her school's talent show, and certainly never expecting that the man the song was written about would be sitting in his living room on the night everything was about to unravel. Let's go back 15 years. Elijah Brooks was 23 years old, a scholarship student at the Boston Music Conservatory, one of only 3 black students in his entire program. He'd grown up in South Memphis, the son of a single mother who'd worked 2 jobs to pay for his piano lessons. Music wasn't just his passion. It was his way out, his ticket to a different life. That's where he met Dominic Hartwell. Dominic was everything Elijah wasn't. Old money, Connecticut prep school, a last name that opened doors before he even had to knock. His family owned half the real estate in downtown Boston, and his trust fund could have paid for Elijah's entire education 10 times over. But when Dominic sat down at the piano, none of that mattered. The boy could play. Not technically perfect. Not like Elijah, who'd spent years perfecting every note, but with a raw emotion that made something in Elijah's chest tighten every time he heard it. They became practice partners, then friends, then something more, at least for Elijah. It happened gradually, the way these things always do. Late nights in the practice rooms, cups of terrible coffee at 3 in the morning. Dominic's hand on his shoulder when he was frustrated with a difficult passage. The way Dominic looked at him sometimes when he thought Elijah wasn't paying attention. Elijah fell in love slowly, and then all at once. He spent 3 months convinced it was one-sided, that he was imagining the tension between them, that his feelings were his burden to carry alone. He'd known he was gay since he was 15, but this was different. This wasn't just attraction. This was the feeling that he'd finally found someone who understood the language his soul spoke. And then came the night of the winter recital. Elijah had performed a piece he'd composed himself, a jazz-influenced arrangement that had the audience on their feet. But he only cared about one person's reaction. After the applause died down, after the crowds dispersed, Dominic had found him backstage. "That was incredible," Dominic had said, and there was something in his eyes that made Elijah's heart race. "The way you play, it's like you're telling a story nobody else can hear." "Maybe I am," Elijah had replied, his voice barely above a whisper. They were alone in the practice room. The building was empty. The moment stretched between them like a taut string ready to snap. "What story are you telling?" Dominic asked, stepping closer. And Elijah, emboldened by adrenaline and hope and the reckless courage of youth, had said, "The story of how I feel about you." For one perfect moment, Dominic's face had lit up with something that looked like joy. For one perfect moment, Elijah thought that maybe, just maybe, his feelings were returned. For one perfect moment, Dominic had reached for his hand. And then Dominic's phone had rung. It was his father. Elijah would never forget the way Dominic's expression changed when he saw the name on the screen. The way all the warmth drained from his face, replaced by something cold and distant. Dominic had answered the phone. Elijah had only heard one side of the conversation, but it was enough. "Yes, Father, I'm still at the conservatory. No, I'll be home soon. Yes, I remember dinner with the Vanderbilts tomorrow. Yes, I know it's important for my future." When Dominic hung up, he wouldn't meet Elijah's eyes. "I can't do this," Dominic had said quietly. "My family, they have expectations, plans for me. I'm sorry, Elijah, but whatever you think this is, it can't happen." "What I think this is," Elijah had felt his heart cracking like ice. "Dominic, I just told you how I feel. And you were going to... I saw it in your face. You were going to say, you feel the same way. It doesn't matter what I feel." Dominic's voice had been hollow. "It matters what's possible. And this us, it's not possible. Not for someone like me. Someone like you," Elijah had repeated, tasting the bitterness of those words. "You mean someone rich. Someone whose family would rather see him miserable than honest. You don't understand the pressure I'm under. Then help me understand. Don't just walk away." But Dominic had walked away. He'd transferred to a different program at a different school 2 weeks later, and Elijah never saw him again. Until tonight. The years after that heartbreak hadn't been kind to Elijah. He'd finished his degree, but the fire had gone out of his music. He'd gotten married to Rachel, a woman he'd met at a friend's party, a woman who was nice enough and pretty enough, and who didn't ask too many questions about why he sometimes seemed distant. He'd convinced himself that he could build a normal life, that he could be the man everyone expected him to be. They'd had Maya when Elijah was 30, and for a while, fatherhood had filled the empty spaces in his heart. Maya was perfect. All big brown eyes and curiosity and a laugh that could light up the darkest room. But the marriage had crumbled. Rachel had grown tired of feeling like she was competing with a ghost, even though she never knew exactly what ghost haunted her husband. They'd divorced 3 years ago, and Elijah had fought for custody because Maya was the only real thing in his life. Now, He worked night shifts at a warehouse in South Boston, loading trucks and stacking boxes, work that left his back aching and his hands calloused. The piano in his tiny apartment was the same one his mother had given him before she passed. He barely touched it anymore. Playing reminded him too much of who he used to be, who he might have become if things had been different. He made enough to keep Maya fed and clothed and safe, but there was never anything extra. No money for the piano lessons Maya had started asking about. No savings for emergencies, just the day-to-day struggle of keeping their heads above water. And now Rachel wanted custody. She'd sent the papers 2 weeks ago claiming that Elijah couldn't provide a stable environment, that Maya deserved better than a one-bedroom apartment and a father who worked all night and slept all day. The worst part was Elijah couldn't argue with her logic. He was tired. He was broke. He was barely holding it together. But Maya was his world. She was the reason he got up every morning. She was the reason he kept going when everything felt impossible. And he'd be damned if he'd let anyone take her away from him. Standing in that doorway now, watching Dominic Hartwell charm his daughter, Elijah felt something dark and cold settle in his stomach. He pushed open the door. 3 heads turned toward him. Maya's face lit up with pure joy. "Daddy!" She jumped off the couch and ran to him, throwing her arms around his waist. "You're home early." Traffic was light. Elijah managed his eyes locked on Dominic. "Hey, baby girl, who's your friend?" Rachel stood up, smoothing her expensive-looking dress. When had she started wearing clothes like that? When had she started looking so polished, so put together? "Elijah, this is Dominic Hartwell. He's my boss at Hartwell Technologies. Dominic, this is my ex-husband, Elijah Brooks." Dominic stood extending his hand with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Brooks. Rachel's told me a lot about you." Elijah stared at that outstretched hand, remembering the last time he'd touched it 15 years ago in a dark practice room. He shook it briefly, feeling the expensive watch on Dominic's wrist press against his skin. "Mr. Hartwell," Elijah said evenly. Rachel didn't mention she was bringing company. "I hope you don't mind," Dominic said smoothly. "Rachel's been such an asset to my company, I wanted to meet her family. And I have to say, Maya's been telling me all about her school talent show. She says she's going to play the piano. I used to play myself back in college." The words hung in the air between them. "I used to play myself." Did Dominic remember? Did he recognize Elijah? Or had 15 years and $1 billion erased any memory of the poor scholarship student whose heart he'd broken? "Maya's very talented," Elijah said carefully. "Takes after her grandmother. Daddy, Mr. Hartwell says he might be able to help with my piano lessons." Maya bounced excitedly. "He knows a really good teacher who could come to our house and everything." Elijah's jaw tightened. "We're doing just fine on our own, baby girl." Rachel stepped forward, and there was something sharp in her expression. "Elijah, can I talk to you in the kitchen for a moment?" It wasn't really a question. Elijah followed her into the narrow kitchen, leaving Maya chattering away to Dominic in the living room. As soon as they were out of earshot, Rachel's pleasant mask dropped. "You need to be realistic," she said in a low voice. "Maya deserves opportunities, real opportunities, not just you teaching her on that broken-down piano. There's nothing wrong with my piano. There's everything wrong with this situation." Rachel's eyes flashed. "Look at this place, Elijah. Look at your life. You're barely scraping by. I'm offering Maya a chance at something better." "Better?" Elijah felt anger rising in his chest. "You mean richer? That's what this is about, isn't it? You found yourself a rich boss and suddenly you think you can buy our daughter. I think I can provide for our daughter in ways you can't." And Dominic agrees with me. He's offered to help with legal fees. The words hit Elijah like a punch to the gut. "Legal fees? Rachel? What are you talking about? I'm filing for full custody. Dominic's lawyer is drawing up the papers. We'll be in court next month." Elijah gripped the edge of the counter, his knuckles turning white. You can't do this. I can, and I am. It's time to face facts, Elijah. Maya needs more than you can give her. From the living room, they could hear Maya's laughter and Dominic's deeper voice responding. The sound of his daughter's joy mixed with the voice of the man who'd broken his heart 15 years ago was almost more than Elijah could bear. "Get out of my house," Elijah said quietly. "Excuse me. You heard me. Take your rich boss and get out. And if you think for 1 second I'm going to roll over and let you take my daughter, you don't know me at all." Rachel's expression hardened. "We'll see what the judge says about that." She turned and walked back into the living room. Elijah heard her say something to Dominic in a bright, fake voice, heard Maya protest that they had to leave so soon, heard the rustle of coats and the click of the door. Then silence. Elijah walked back into the living room where Maya stood looking confused. "Why did they have to go?" she asked. "Grown-up stuff, baby," Elijah said, pulling her into a hug. "Nothing for you to worry about." But he was worried. Terrified, actually. Because Rachel was right about one thing. He was barely holding on. And if Dominic Hartwell was backing her with all his money and power and connections, what chance did Elijah have? What chance did he have of keeping the only thing in his life that mattered? The next morning, Elijah woke up to the sound of piano music. For a moment, still half asleep, he thought he was dreaming. No one had played that piano in months. But as consciousness sharpened, he realized the music was real. Halting and uncertain, but real. He stumbled out of his bedroom in his old t-shirt and sweatpants to find Maya sitting at the piano bench, her small fingers stretched across the keys, trying to pick out a melody. "Baby girl," he said gently. "What are you doing?" Maya turned to him with those big brown eyes that could melt his heart from across a room. "I want to learn Daddy. I want to play like Grandma did." Elijah's mother had died 5 years ago, but Maya still remembered, still talked about the stories Elijah had told of how his mother had worked double shifts just to afford his piano lessons, how she'd sit and listen to him practice for hours with tears of joy streaming down her face. "I told you, sweetheart, lessons are expensive, but you could teach me." Maya's face lit up with hope. "You play really good. I've heard you sometimes late at night when you think I'm sleeping. You could teach me." Something in Elijah's chest cracked open. He hadn't realized Maya had been listening during those rare nights when he couldn't sleep, when he'd sit at the piano in the darkness and let his fingers remember what it felt like to create something beautiful. He walked over and sat down next to her on the bench. "Okay," he said softly. "I'll teach you." "Really?" Maya practically vibrated with excitement. "Really, but you have to promise me you'll practice every day. Learning piano is hard work. I promise, I promise, I promise." Maya threw her arms around his neck. "Thank you, Daddy." And so they began. Every morning before Elijah went to sleep, and every evening before he left for work, they sat at that old piano together. Elijah showed her how to position her hands, how to read notes, how to feel the music, instead of just playing it mechanically. Maya was a natural. She had her grandmother's instinct for melody, that same quality Elijah's mother had possessed, the ability to make even simple scales sound like they were telling a story. Within 2 weeks, Maya could play basic melodies. Within a month, she was working on simple classical pieces. And every moment they spent at that piano together felt like a gift, like a small rebellion against Rachel's claim that he couldn't give Maya anything of value. But there was something else happening too, something Elijah didn't expect. Teaching Maya made him fall in love with music again. For years, playing the piano had felt like reopening a wound. Every note reminded him of who he'd been, of the dreams he'd abandoned, of the heartbreak that had derailed his entire life. But watching Maya discover the joy of creation, seeing her face light up when she finally mastered a difficult passage, feeling the pride surge through him, when she played something beautiful, all of that started to heal something in him he hadn't even realized was still broken. One evening, about 6 weeks into their lessons, Maya looked up at him and said, "Daddy, will you play something for me? Something you wrote?" Elijah hesitated. "I don't really write music anymore, baby." "But you used to. You told me about it. About how you wrote songs in college." "That was a long time ago." "Please," Maya gave him that look, the one she knew he couldn't resist. Just one song. And before he could stop himself, before he could remember all the reasons why this was a bad idea, Elijah's hands moved to the keys and began to play When Tomorrow Comes. The melody flowed out of him like it had been waiting 15 years to be released. Soft and melancholic at first, building to something more hopeful in the middle, then falling back into a bittersweet resolution that never quite found its way home. When he finished, there was silence. Then Maya said, "That's the most beautiful song I've ever heard." "What's it called, When Tomorrow Comes?" Elijah said quietly. "Who did you write it for?" "Someone I used to know. Someone who mattered to me a long time ago." Maya studied his face with the kind of perception that children sometimes have the ability to sense the truth, even when adults try to hide it. "Someone you loved." Elijah's throat tightened. "Yeah, baby, someone I loved. Will you teach it to me?" Every instinct screamed at him to say no. This song was too personal, too raw, too connected to a past he'd tried to bury. But looking at Maya's eager face, feeling the music still resonating in his chest, he found himself nodding. "Okay," he said. "I'll teach you." 3 weeks later, Maya came home from school practically vibrating with excitement. "Daddy, Daddy, Daddy!" She burst through the door before Elijah had even fully woken up. "They're having a talent show at school next month. Can I sign up?" "Please, please, please." Elijah rubbed sleep from his eyes, trying to focus. "A talent show. Yes, for families and everything. And I want to play piano. I want to play When Tomorrow Comes. The song you taught me." Something cold settled in Elijah's stomach. "Baby, that song it's personal. Maybe you should play something else." "But I love that song, and I've been practicing so hard. Please, Daddy, I want everyone to hear how beautiful it is." Elijah looked at his daughter's hopeful face and felt his resolve crumbling. What harm could it do, really? It was just a school talent show. Rachel would probably be too busy with her fancy new job to even attend. And Dominic wouldn't know the song anyway. He'd never heard it. "Okay," Elijah heard himself say. "If that's what you want to perform, then we'll make sure you're ready." Maya squealed and hugged him so hard he almost fell over. For the next 3 weeks, they practiced every single day. Elijah worked with Maya on every phrase, every dynamic, every moment where the melody needed to breathe. He taught her not just the notes, but the feeling behind them. The longing, the hope, the heartbreak, the acceptance. He never told her what those feelings meant. He never explained that this song was about loving someone you couldn't have, about the moment when dreams die, about learning to live with a ghost in your chest. But Maya seemed to understand anyway, in that instinctive way musicians sometimes do. She played the song with a maturity beyond her years, and every time Elijah heard her perform it, something in his heart broke and healed simultaneously. The custody hearing was scheduled for 2 days after the talent show. Rachel had sent the papers through her lawyer, a man named Gerald Hutchinson, who wore suits that probably cost more than Elijah made in 6 months. The accusations were laid out in cold legal language: inadequate living conditions, financial instability, inability to provide educational opportunities. Elijah couldn't afford a lawyer. He was going to represent himself in court, which everyone told him was professional suicide. But what choice did he have? Every dollar he made went to keeping a roof over their heads and food on the table. He'd tried not to let Maya see how worried he was, tried to keep smiling, keep encouraging, keep pretending that everything was going to be okay. But late at night, after his shift ended, and he came home to their quiet apartment, Elijah would sit at the piano and let himself feel the terror that lived in his bones now. The terror that he was going to lose his daughter. 1 week before the talent show, Rachel called him. "I want to give you one more chance," she said without preamble. "Drop the custody fight. Agree to supervised visitation. Make this easy on everyone, especially Maya." "No," Elijah said flatly. "Elijah, be reasonable. You can't win this. Dominic's lawyer is one of the best in the state. You're going to walk into that courtroom and get destroyed." "Maybe, but I'm not giving up without a fight." Rachel sighed, and for just a moment she sounded like the woman he'd married, the woman who'd sometimes been kind. "I don't want to hurt you. I just want what's best for Maya. If you wanted what's best for Maya, you wouldn't be trying to take her away from her father. A father who can barely support her. A father who loves her more than anything in this world. Love doesn't pay for piano lessons. Love doesn't pay for college. Love doesn't open doors." "No," Elijah said quietly. "But love shows up. Love stays. Love doesn't abandon ship the second something richer comes along." The silence on the other end of the line was heavy. "I'll see you in court," Rachel finally said, and hung up. Elijah stood there in his kitchen phone still pressed to his ear, listening to the dial tone, and wondering how his life had become this mess. Wondering how the boy who used to believe music could save him had ended up here, fighting to keep the only good thing he'd ever created. The next day, Maya asked him if he would come watch her practice at school. They had a dress rehearsal for the talent show, and she wanted him to see her perform on the actual auditorium stage. Elijah almost said no. He needed to sleep before his shift. But the hope in Maya's eyes was impossible to deny. So he showed up at Roosevelt Elementary School at 2 in the afternoon, bleary-eyed and exhausted, and sat in the back of the auditorium while his daughter climbed onto the stage. The piano was better than theirs at home, a baby grand that had seen better days but still had good bones. Maya sat down at the bench, her feet barely reaching the pedals, and looked out into the darkness until she found him. Elijah gave her a thumbs up. And then Maya began to play When Tomorrow Comes. In that moment, sitting in the darkness of that school auditorium, listening to his daughter pour her heart into a song he'd written during the worst time of his life, Elijah understood something he'd been too afraid to see before. Music hadn't abandoned him. He'd abandoned it. Out of fear. Out of pain. Out of the belief that some dreams were meant to die. But Maya was giving that dream back to him with every note she played. When she finished, he was crying. Not quiet tears, but big shoulder-shaking sobs that he couldn't control. The other parents in the auditorium looked at him with confusion, probably thinking he was just an overly emotional father. They didn't know. They couldn't understand. This song was about loss and love and longing, and hearing it played by the one person in the world he loved more than anything was almost more than his heart could handle. After the rehearsal, Maya ran down from the stage and threw herself into his arms. "Did I do good, Daddy?" "You did perfect, baby girl," Elijah managed through his tears. "Absolutely perfect." The talent show was scheduled for Friday evening at 7 o'clock. The custody hearing was Monday morning at 9. Elijah had requested the day off from work for both events, which his supervisor had grudgingly approved. He spent Thursday preparing ironing his one good shirt, making sure Maya's dress was clean, trying to memorize the statement he planned to give in court. about why he deserved to keep custody of his daughter. Friday morning, Maya was so excited she could barely eat breakfast. "Tonight's the night," she kept saying. "Tonight, everyone gets to hear our song, our song." The way she said it made Elijah's heart clench. She'd claimed this piece of music as theirs, something they shared, a bond between father and daughter. She had no idea what the song really meant, who it was really written for. Maybe that was for the best. They spent the afternoon getting ready. Elijah helped Maya with her hair, pulling it back into a style his mother used to do for her when she was young. He adjusted his tie 3 times in the mirror, trying to look like a man who had his life together, even though he felt like he was barely holding on. At 6:30, they arrived at the school. The parking lot was already full. Elijah held Maya's hand as they walked toward the auditorium, his daughter practically skipping with excitement while his stomach churned with nervousness. And then he saw them. Rachel's car. The expensive sedan she'd been driving lately parked right near the entrance. And next to it, a black SUV with tinted windows that screamed money and power. His feet slowed. "Come on, Daddy." Maya tugged at his hand. "We're gonna be late." But Elijah couldn't move, because he knew who was in that SUV. He knew without seeing, without confirmation, with the kind of certainty that comes from understanding how the universe likes to twist the knife. Dominic was here. The man who'd broken his heart was going to sit in that auditorium and listen to the song Elijah had written about him performed by the daughter Elijah was about to lose. The cosmic irony was almost funny. Almost. Daddy Maya looked up at him with concern. "Are you okay?" Elijah forced a smile. "Yeah, baby, I'm fine. Let's go." They entered the school, and the hallway was packed with families. Kids in costumes, parents with cameras, teachers trying to maintain some semblance of order. Maya had to check in backstage, so Elijah walked her there, kissed her forehead, and told her he'd be in the audience, cheering her on. Then he made his way into the auditorium to find a seat. The place was filling up fast. Elijah spotted Rachel sitting in the 3rd row, and his breath caught when he saw who was next to her. Dominic Hartwell, looking every inch the billionaire CEO, in a suit that probably cost more than Elijah's car. His silver-streaked hair was perfectly styled, his posture radiating the kind of confidence that comes from never having to worry about money or power or whether you'll make rent next month. For a moment, their eyes met across the auditorium. Elijah saw recognition flicker in Dominic's expression, quickly masked by polite neutrality. So Dominic did remember him. The question was, did Dominic remember the music Elijah found a seat in the back, as far from Rachel and Dominic as possible? His hands were shaking. This was a mistake. He should have told Maya to perform a different song, should have seen this coming, should have protected himself better. But it was too late now. The lights dimmed. The principal walked onto the stage and gave a welcome speech that Elijah barely heard over the roaring in his ears. And then the show began. Act after act, a magic show, a comedy routine, a dance number, a violin solo. All of it washed over Elijah like he was underwater, drowning slowly, waiting for the moment when his entire past would be laid bare in front of an audience of strangers and the 2 people who'd shaped his life in ways they didn't even understand. And then the principal announced, "Next up, we have Maya Brooks performing an original composition on the piano." Elijah's heart stopped. Original composition. Maya must have told the principal that When Tomorrow Comes was an original piece, which it was. Just not hers. Maya walked onto the stage in her pretty dress, looking so small next to the big piano. She sat down at the bench, adjusted her position the way Elijah had taught her, and placed her hands on the keys. In the audience, Elijah could see Rachel lean forward with interest, could see Dominic's posture stiffen slightly, though from this distance he couldn't read the expression on the man's face. Maya looked out into the darkness, trying to find her father. Elijah raised his hand slightly, just enough for her to see. She smiled. And then she began to play. The performance was perfect. Every note exactly as Elijah had taught her, every dynamic precise, every phrase shaped with care and feeling. Maya played like someone far beyond her years, and when she finished, the audience erupted in applause. Elijah clapped until his hands hurt pride and terror and love, all mixing together in his chest, until he thought he might explode from the pressure of it all. Maya took a bow, grinning from ear to ear, and ran off stage. Elijah wanted to bolt, wanted to grab his daughter and run before anyone could corner him, before Dominic could say anything, before this night became more complicated than it already was. But he couldn't leave Maya. So he stayed in his seat, clapping through the rest of the performances, his mind racing with questions and fears, and the sick certainty that his carefully constructed walls were about to come crashing down. When the show ended, families flooded toward the stage to collect their kids. Elijah pushed through the crowd, desperate to find Maya before anyone else did. He found her backstage, surrounded by classmates and teachers, all congratulating her. Her face was flushed with happiness, her eyes bright with pride. "Daddy?" She launched herself at him. "Did you see? Did you hear everyone loved it? You were amazing, baby girl," Elijah said, hugging her tight. "I'm so proud of you." "Mr. Brooks." The voice came from behind him, cold and professional. Elijah turned to find Gerald Hutchinson, Rachel's lawyer, standing there with a manila folder in his hand. "Mr. Hutchinson," Elijah said carefully, "this is hardly the time or place. I just wanted to give you these." The lawyer held out the folder. "Final documents for Monday's hearing. I suggest you review them carefully. Mrs. Montgomery has added additional evidence regarding the inadequacy of your living situation." Elijah took the folder with numb fingers, acutely aware that Maya was watching this exchange with confused eyes. "Who's that man, Daddy?" she whispered. "No one important, baby." Elijah lied. "Elijah." Another voice, this one familiar in a way that made his skin prickle. He turned to find Rachel standing there, and behind her, Dominic Hartwell. Up close, Dominic looked older than Elijah remembered. Lines around his eyes, gray at his temples, a weariness in his expression that wealth couldn't hide. But he was still handsome, still carried himself with that effortless grace that had first caught Elijah's attention all those years ago. "That was quite a performance," Rachel said, her voice tight. "Maya, you did beautifully." "Thank you, Mom." Maya beamed, oblivious to the tension crackling in the air. Dominic stepped forward, and Elijah had to resist the urge to step back. "Maya, your father must be very proud. That was an extraordinary piece of music." "Daddy wrote it," Maya said happily. "It's called When Tomorrow Comes. He wrote it when he was in college." Elijah watched Dominic's expression shift, watched something flicker in those eyes, watched recognition dawn like a slow sunrise. "Is that so?" Dominic's voice was carefully controlled, but Elijah could hear the tremor underneath. "Your father wrote that song?" "Uh-huh." "He said he wrote it for someone he loved a long time ago." Maya turned to Elijah. "Right, Daddy?" The silence that followed was deafening. Rachel looked between Elijah and Dominic, confusion evident on her face. But Dominic was staring at Elijah with an intensity that made everything else fade into the background. Elijah Brooks. Dominic said slowly, as if tasting the name. Boston Music Conservatory, class of 2010. You two know each other? Rachel's voice was sharp with surprise. We went to school together. Elijah managed his voice rough. A long time ago. A long time ago, Dominic repeated, and there was something bitter in his tone. Yes, it has been, hasn't it? Maya tugged on Elijah's hand. Daddy, can we go get ice cream? You promised if I did good, we could get ice cream? Yeah, baby. Elijah couldn't take his eyes off Dominic. Let's go. Actually, Rachel said quickly. Maya, why don't you come home with me tonight? We can celebrate your performance. But Daddy promised ice cream, Maya protested. And you can have ice cream with me. We'll go to that fancy place downtown you like. Elijah felt his jaw clench. This was what Rachel did now, used money and treats to lure Maya away from him. She can go with me. We had plans. Plans that accommodate your work schedule. Rachel's voice dripped with false concern. Or were you going to drag her out at midnight for ice cream before your shift? The dig hit home. Elijah worked nights. His schedule didn't align with normal family time. Rachel knew it. The court would know it. And standing there in his worn suit with his meager ice cream promise, Elijah felt the weight of his inadequacy crushing down on him. It's okay, Daddy, Maya said quietly, sensing the tension. I can go with Mom. We'll get ice cream another time. It felt like a betrayal, even though he knew it wasn't. Maya was just a kid trying to navigate the war between her parents. But watching Rachel take his daughter's hand, watching Dominic stand there as a silent witness to his failure, Elijah felt something break inside him. Monday, Mr. Brooks Gerald Hutchinson said as a parting shot, 9 a.m. sharp. Don't be late. They left. All of them. Rachel and Maya and Dominic and the lawyer walking out of the backstage area like they were a unit, like they belonged together, while Elijah stood alone, surrounded by the debris of the best and worst night of his life. He looked down at the manila folder in his hands. Inside would be more evidence of his failures, more legal arguments for why he wasn't good enough to be a father to his own daughter. Elijah walked out to his car, sat in the driver's seat, and finally let himself fall apart. The weekend before the custody hearing was the longest of Elijah's life. He'd called in sick to work something he never did because he couldn't face the warehouse, knowing that his entire world was about to end. Instead, he spent Saturday and Sunday trying to prepare for court, trying to figure out what he was going to say to a judge to explain why he deserved to keep his daughter. But every time he sat down to write notes, his mind wandered back to that moment in the school auditorium when Dominic had realized what song Maya was playing. The look on Dominic's face had been complex layers of emotion that Elijah couldn't quite parse. Shock, certainly. Recognition. But something else, too. Something that might have been regret. Or maybe Elijah was just seeing what he wanted to see. Saturday afternoon, his phone rang. Unknown number. Hello, Elijah. It's Dominic. The world tilted. Elijah sat down heavily on his couch phone, pressed so hard to his ear it hurt. How did you get my number? Rachel gave it to me. I hope you don't mind. I wanted to talk to you about the song. There's nothing to talk about. I think there is. Dominic's voice was quiet. I never knew you wrote that for me. All these years I never knew. Why would you? Elijah's laugh was bitter. You made it clear you wanted nothing to do with me. You transferred schools. You moved on with your life. What did it matter what I wrote or didn't write? It mattered. It matters. A pause. Elijah, that song was beautiful. Hearing it again after all this time, it brought back everything. Everything I've spent 15 years trying to forget. Don't. Elijah's voice cracked. Don't do this. Not now. Not when you're helping my ex-wife destroy me in court. I'm not trying to destroy you. Then what do you call it? Paying for her lawyer, supporting her custody petition. You're using your money and power to take my daughter away from me. And for what? What did I ever do to you, besides love you, when you were too much of a coward to love me back? The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long that Elijah thought Dominic had hung up. Then quietly, "You're right. I was a coward. I've been a coward for 15 years. I don't want your confession, Dominic. It's too late for that." Is it? Because when I heard that song yesterday, all I could think about was that night in the practice room. The night I walked away from you. The night I chose my family's expectations over my own happiness. I've spent 15 years building an empire, Elijah. I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. I have power and influence and success, and I'm miserable. Elijah closed his eyes. That's not my problem. I know it's not. I know I have no right to unload this on you. But I need you to understand something. Rachel came to me asking for help with the custody case, and I said yes because I thought I was doing the right thing. She told me you were struggling, that Maya needed more stability. She made it sound like helping her was helping Maya. And now I've seen you with your daughter. I've heard the music you created. I've watched the way Maya looks at you, like you hung the moon, and I realize I may have made another colossal mistake. Elijah's heart was pounding. What are you saying? I'm saying I need to think about this. About whether I'm really helping Maya or just helping Rachel punish you. I'm saying that hearing that song changed something for me, and I need time to figure out what. The hearing is Monday morning. You don't have time. Then I'll have to work fast. Dominic took a breath. For what it's worth, Elijah, I'm sorry. For everything. For what I did to you back then. For what I'm doing to you now, I'm sorry. The line went dead. Elijah sat there for a long time, phone still in his hand, trying to process what had just happened. Was Dominic really going to back off? Or was this just another way to give Elijah false hope before crushing him completely? He couldn't afford to hope. Hope was dangerous. Hope was what had destroyed him 15 years ago. The rest of Saturday passed in a blur. Elijah tried to focus on preparing for court, but his mind kept drifting back to Dominic's voice, to the apology that had come 15 years too late, to the slim possibility that maybe, just maybe, things might work out. Sunday morning, Maya called him. "Daddy, can you come pick me up?" "What's wrong, baby girl?" "Nothing's wrong. I just miss you. Mom's been on the phone all day with Mr. Hartwell and she seems upset. I want to come home." Elijah's heart clenched. "Put your mother on the phone." There was rustling, then Rachel's voice tight with anger. "What Maya wants to come home. I'm coming to get her." "That's not a good idea right now. I don't care if it's a good idea. She's my daughter and she wants to come home. Unless you're going to violate the custody agreement we have right now, you'll let me pick her up." More silence. Then, grudgingly, "Fine. But don't be late dropping her off tonight. We have things to prepare for tomorrow." Elijah drove to Rachel's new apartment, a place he'd only seen once before. A sleek, modern building in the expensive part of town that she definitely couldn't afford on her executive assistant salary. Dominic must be paying for it. Of course he was. Maya ran out as soon as his car pulled up, throwing herself into the passenger seat with relief evident on her face. "Can we go to the park, Daddy? The one with the swings?" "Sure, baby. Whatever you want." They spent the afternoon at the park, just the two of them. Maya swung higher and higher while Elijah pushed her, her laughter ringing out in the cool autumn air. They got hot dogs from a vendor. They fed ducks at the pond. They sat on a bench and watched clouds drift by. Normal things. Simple things. The kind of things that rich people with fancy lawyers and tech empires didn't understand were actually priceless. Daddy Maya leaned against his side. Are you and Mom fighting because of me? Elijah's throat tightened. No, baby. None of this is because of you. But the man Mom's always talking to on the phone, the lawyer man, he talks about me. I heard them yesterday. They were talking about where I should live. Damn Rachel for letting Maya overhear that. Your mom and I just have some grown-up stuff to figure out. But no matter what happens, you know I love you more than anything in the whole world, right? I know. Maya was quiet for a moment. Daddy, will you always be my daddy? Even if I have to live with Mom more, Elijah had to blink back tears. Always, baby girl. Always. Nothing will ever change that. Promise, I promise. That evening, when he dropped Maya back at Rachel's apartment, his ex-wife met him at the door with an expression he couldn't quite read. Dominic called me, she said, without preamble. He's withdrawing his support for the custody case. Elijah's world stopped spinning. What, he's pulling his lawyer? Said he can't in good conscience help me take Maya away from you. Rachel's face was tight with barely controlled anger. What did you say to him? I didn't say anything. He called me, but I didn't ask him to back off. Well, someone changed his mind, and I have a feeling it has something to do with that song Maya performed. Rachel's eyes narrowed. What was your relationship with Dominic really, Elijah? Back in college, that's none of your business. It is if it's affecting my daughter's future. Your daughter's future is just fine with me. It always has been. Elijah felt exhausted, drained of everything except the relief flooding through him. If Dominic won't back your case, what are you going to do? Rachel looked away. I don't know. I can't afford Hutchinson on my own. And without his testimony about being able to provide better opportunities, she trailed off, then looked back at him with something that might have been grudging respect. You're really good with her, you know. I see that. I want more for her than what we had growing up. So do I. But being rich isn't the same as being loved. Maybe not. But it helps. Rachel sighed. I'm not dropping the case entirely, but without Dominic's support, I'm going to have to rethink my strategy. Maybe we can work out a better custody arrangement without going to court. Maybe, Elijah said carefully, not daring to hope too much. After he left Rachel's building, Elijah sat in his car for a long time, hands shaking on the steering wheel. Dominic had backed off. The custody case wasn't over, but it wasn't the insurmountable battle he'd thought it was going to be. Why had Dominic done it? The song Guilt. Some combination of both. Elijah's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. I meant what I said. I'm sorry for everything. You deserved better than what I gave you then and now. D. Elijah stared at the message for a long time before deleting it. He couldn't afford to let Dominic back into his heart, not even a little bit. That door had closed 15 years ago, and it needed to stay closed. But as he drove home through the darkening streets, Elijah couldn't stop himself from remembering what it had felt like to be 23 and in love, to believe that music and passion could overcome any obstacle, to think that happy endings were possible for people like him. He'd lost that belief a long time ago, but maybe, just maybe, he was starting to find it again. Monday morning arrived with the weight of inevitability. Elijah barely slept Sunday night. He kept running through what he would say to the judge, kept imagining worst-case scenarios, kept wondering if Dominic's withdrawal of support would really make a difference, or if Rachel would find some other way to take Maya from him. He got dressed in his good suit, the only suit he owned, bought from a thrift store 5 years ago for his mother's funeral. He knotted his tie 3 times before getting it right, his hands shaking so badly he could barely manage it. At 8:15, his phone rang. Mr. Brooks. This is Judge Patricia Anderson's clerk. I'm calling to inform you that Rachel Montgomery has withdrawn her petition for modified custody. Elijah had to sit down. Mrs. Montgomery filed paperwork this morning withdrawing her petition. The hearing scheduled for today has been cancelled. Your current custody arrangement will remain in place. I don't understand. Why would she withdraw? I'm not privy to that information, Mr. Brooks. I'm simply informing you that you don't need to appear in court today. After the clerk hung up, Elijah sat in stunned silence. Rachel had dropped the case. Completely. Not just delayed it or modified it, but withdrawn it entirely. His phone rang again. This time, it was Rachel. I'm assuming you got the call, she said, her voice oddly flat. What happened? Why did you drop it? Because Dominic was right. Because watching you with Maya on Friday night, seeing how she looks at you, I realized I was doing this for the wrong reasons. I was doing it because I was angry at you, because I felt like you'd never really loved me the way you should have, because I wanted to punish you for something that wasn't your fault. Elijah's chest tightened. Rachel, let me finish. I spent 15 years competing with a ghost Elijah. I knew you were holding something back, some part of yourself you never gave me. I thought if I just tried hard enough, loved you enough, you'd eventually open up. But you never did. And when I met Dominic, when I saw the way he looked at you that first night in your apartment, I finally understood why. I never meant to hurt you, I know. And I never meant to use Maya as a weapon. But that's what I was doing, and it wasn't fair to her or to you. Rachel took a shaky breath. Dominic came to see me yesterday. He told me everything. About college, about the song, about why he walked away. He said watching Maya perform that song made him realize how much damage we've both done by not being honest about who we are and what we want. Where is Dominic now, I don't know. He quit as my boss this morning. Said he needed to step away from the company for a while, figure some things out. He left me with enough money to get a good lawyer for a fair custody arrangement. One that actually puts Maya first instead of our egos. Elijah couldn't process it all. So what happens now? Now we do this the right way. We work out a schedule that's fair to everyone. We co-parent like adults. And we stop using our daughter as a bargaining chip in whatever war we think we're fighting. I can agree to that. Good. A pause. For what it's worth, Elijah, I hope you find happiness. Real happiness. The kind you couldn't find with me. After she hung up, Elijah sat in his silent apartment, the suit suddenly feeling too tight, too formal for a court appearance that was never going to happen. He'd won. Not through legal brilliance or financial resources or any kind of strategy. He'd won because his daughter had played a song, and that song had unlocked something in Dominic Hartwell that 15 years of success and wealth and power had kept buried. Elijah stood up, loosened his tie, and walked over to the piano. His fingers found the keys, and he began to play When Tomorrow Comes. But this time, something was different. This time, the melody didn't feel like a wound. It felt like a bridge between who he'd been and who he was becoming. It felt like proof that some things, some feelings, some truths couldn't be buried, no matter how hard you tried. And for the first time in 15 years, Elijah played the song all the way through without crying. 3 days after the canceled custody hearing, someone knocked on Elijah's door. It was Thursday evening. Elijah had just gotten home from dropping Maya at school for her after-school art program. He was still in his warehouse uniform, exhausted from another 12-hour shift, looking forward to a few hours of sleep before picking Maya up again. He opened the door. Dominic Hartwell stood in the hallway looking nothing like the polished CEO Elijah had seen at the talent show. He wore jeans and a simple sweater, his usually perfect hair slightly disheveled, his face showing signs of sleeplessness. "Hi," Dominic said quietly. Elijah gripped the doorframe. "What are you doing here? I know I'm probably the last person you want to see. But I needed to talk to you, face to face, not over the phone, not through other people, just you and me." Every instinct told Elijah to close the door to protect himself from whatever this was. But there was something in Dominic's expression, a vulnerability he'd never seen before, that made him hesitate. "Fine," Elijah said. "You've got 5 minutes." He let Dominic into his small apartment, acutely aware of how shabby everything must look to a man who lived in penthouses and mansions. The worn furniture, the scuffed floors, the general aura of barely making ends meet. But Dominic wasn't looking at the apartment. He was looking at the piano. "Is that where you wrote it?" Dominic asked, walking toward the instrument like it was a holy relic. The song, "No." "I wrote it on my mother's piano. This is hers now. Was hers. She left it to me when she died." Dominic ran his fingers along the keys without pressing them. "I never forgot that melody. For 15 years it's been stuck in my head. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night and hear it playing, and I'd remember that night in the practice room. The night I broke both our hearts because I was too weak to stand up to my family. Why are you here?" "Dominic." Dominic turned to face him, and there were tears in his eyes. "Because I'm 50 years old, and I've spent my entire life being who everyone else wanted me to be. I married a woman I didn't love because my parents approved of her family. I built a business empire because that's what was expected of me. I donated to the right charities and joined the right clubs and said all the right things at all the right parties. And I've been absolutely miserable. Again, why are you here? Because hearing that song again woke something up in me. Something I've kept locked away for so long I'd almost convinced myself it didn't exist anymore. But it does exist, Elijah. It's been there all along, just waiting for someone to remind me what it felt like to be real." Elijah shook his head. "You can't do this. You can't show up after 15 years expecting absolution or redemption, or whatever it is you're looking for. You made your choice. You chose wealth and power and your family's approval over me, over us, over any chance at actually being happy. You're right, I did. And I've regretted it every single day since. That's not my problem. I know it's not." Dominic's voice rose, matching Elijah's intensity. "I know I have no right to ask anything from you. I know that ship sailed 15 years ago. But I had to tell you the truth. I had to say out loud what I should have said that night in the practice room. Which is what? That I loved you." The words hung in the air between them, raw and honest. "I loved you, Elijah. I loved you so much it terrified me. And instead of being brave enough to fight for that love, I ran away from it. I spent 15 years running away from it. But I can't run anymore." Elijah felt his anger crumbling, felt the wall around his heart developing cracks. "It's too late." "I know." Dominic's shoulders sagged. "I know it's too late for us. Too much time has passed. Too much damage has been done. I'm not here asking for a second chance. I'm just here asking for your forgiveness. Because I need you to know that walking away from you was the biggest mistake of my life, and not a day has gone by when I haven't thought about what might have been if I'd been braver." Elijah walked to the window, looking out at the street below. "You want my forgiveness. After everything, I want you to be free of me. Free of the pain I caused. I want you to be able to play that song without it hurting. I want you to be happy even if that happiness doesn't include me." Silence filled the apartment. Finally, Elijah spoke. "When Maya played that song at the talent show, do you know what I felt? Tell me." "Pride. Joy. Love. For the first time in 15 years, I heard that melody and didn't feel like I was bleeding out. Because my daughter had taken something born from pain and turned it into something beautiful. She'd reclaimed it, made it about love instead of loss." Elijah turned back to face Dominic. "And I realized something that night. The song was never really about you. It was about me, about my capacity to love even when that love wasn't returned, about my ability to create beauty from heartbreak. You were just the muse, but the music, that was all mine. Dominic nodded slowly. You're right, so I don't need to forgive you, Dominic, because holding on to anger about what happened 15 years ago only hurts me. It doesn't touch you, and I'm tired of hurting. Does that mean it means I'm letting go of the past, of the pain, of the fantasy of what might have been? It means I'm choosing to move forward instead of staying stuck in something that was never going to work anyway. Dominic wiped at his eyes. You're a better man than I am. No, I'm just a man who learned that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is keep living after your heart gets broken. You should try it sometime. A small, sad smile crossed Dominic's face. Maybe I will. He moved toward the door, then paused. Your daughter is remarkable, by the way. You've done an incredible job raising her. I know. And that song, When Tomorrow Comes, it's genius. You should record it, share it with the world. People need to hear music like that. Maybe I will, Elijah echoed. After Dominic left, Elijah stood in his apartment for a long time, feeling lighter than he had in years. The ghost that had haunted him since he was 23 was finally laid to rest. Not through reconciliation or rekindled romance, but through the simple act of releasing it. He sat down at the piano and began to play. Not When Tomorrow Comes, but something new. Something that started with a question and ended with an answer. Something that spoke of resilience and hope, and the quiet strength of choosing to keep going even when the world tells you to give up. He didn't have a title for it yet, but he would. 2 weeks later, Maya came home from school with an announcement. Daddy, guess what Mrs. Patterson wants me to perform at the district music showcase? Elijah looked up from the bills he was organizing on the kitchen table. The district showcase. Baby, that's a huge honor. When is it next month? And she said, I can play any song I want, but I was thinking, Maya bit her lip. I was thinking maybe I could play that new song you've been working on. The one I hear you playing late at night. You hear that I hear everything. Maya grinned. Your piano playing isn't as quiet as you think it is. Elijah laughed. Fair enough. But that song isn't finished yet. It's still rough. Can I help you finish it? Maya's eyes were bright with excitement. We could write it together, like a real collaboration. The idea caught Elijah off guard. He'd been writing music again these past few weeks, letting melodies flow through him the way they used to, rediscovering the joy of creation that he'd thought was lost forever. But he'd been doing it alone, the way he'd always done it. The thought of sharing that process with someone, even his daughter, felt vulnerable in a way he wasn't sure he was ready for. But looking at Maya's hopeful face, he realized that maybe vulnerability was exactly what he needed. Okay, he said. Let's write a song together. They spent the next 3 weeks working on it every evening before Elijah's shift. Maya would come home from school, do her homework as fast as possible, and then they'd sit at the piano together, trading ideas and melodies and lyrics. It was different from writing alone. Maya had instincts that Elijah would never have thought of, directions she wanted the melody to go that surprised him. She pushed him out of his comfort zone, challenged his assumptions, made him think about music in ways he hadn't since he was a student. And slowly, piece by piece, the song came together. They called it Tomorrow's Here. It was about moving forward, about finding strength in unexpected places, about how the future arrives one day at a time, bringing gifts you never expected. About how family isn't just about blood, but about showing up for each other when it matters. The lyrics were simple enough for a child to sing, but with layers of meaning that adults would catch. The melody was hopeful without being saccharine complex, without being pretentious. It was Elijah, realized the best thing he'd ever written. We make a good team, Maya said one evening after they'd finished a particularly productive session. We really do, baby girl. Daddy Maya leaned against his shoulder. I'm glad you and Mom aren't fighting anymore. The custody situation had indeed calmed down. Rachel had worked out a reasonable shared custody arrangement through a mediator, one that gave Elijah primary custody during the school year and Rachel more time during summers and holidays. It wasn't perfect, but it was fair. More importantly, it was focused on what was actually best for Maya instead of what either parent wanted. Me too, sweetheart. And I'm glad you're playing piano again. You're happier when you play. Elijah felt his throat tighten. Am I? Yeah. You smile more. You don't look so tired all the time. It's like the music makes you remember who you are. Out of the mouths of babes. You're pretty wise for 8 years old, you know that I get it from you. The night of the district showcase arrived with the same nervous energy as Maya's school talent show. But this time, Elijah felt different. Lighter. More present. He wasn't dreading what might happen, or who might be in the audience. He was simply excited to watch his daughter share something they'd created together. The showcase was held in a larger auditorium than the school's, with actual professional lighting and sound equipment. There were students from all over the district performing, kids of all ages, showcasing their talents in music and dance and theater. Rachel met them at the venue, and for the first time in years, there was no tension in the greeting. They sat together in the audience, united in their pride for their daughter. She's been practicing non-stop, Rachel said. I hear her humming the melody all the time at my place. Same at mine. I think we've created a monster, Rachel laughed, and it was genuine. A musical monster. Like father, like daughter. When it was Maya's turn to perform, she walked onto the stage with confidence that hadn't been there at the school show. She'd done this before. She knew what to expect. And more importantly, she knew the song inside and out, because she'd helped create it. She sat at the grand piano, adjusted her position, and before she started playing, she spoke into the microphone. Hi, my name is Maya Brooks, and I'm going to perform a song called Tomorrow's Here that I wrote with my dad. Then she began to play. The melody flowed out clear and strong, each note exactly where it needed to be. And then Maya began to sing the lyrics they'd written together, her young voice carrying the words with a sincerity that made Elijah's eyes well up with tears. Yesterday's shadows, they fade away. Tomorrow's here. It's a brand new day. With every sunrise, we're learning to see. The strength we have is in you and me. Through the storms and the rain, through the joy and the pain, we keep moving forward hand in hand. Together we rise, together we stand. The audience was silent, transfixed. Elijah glanced around and saw people wiping their eyes, saw the way Maya's music was reaching into their hearts, the way good music always does. When she finished, the applause was thunderous. Maya stood and took a bow, then pointed to the audience to where Elijah sat. That's my dad, she said into the microphone. He's the best songwriter in the world. And Elijah, sitting next to his ex-wife, in an auditorium full of strangers, finally understood something crucial. He'd spent 15 years thinking that Dominic walking away had broken something essential in him, had stolen his ability to trust in love and music and hope. But he'd been wrong. What Dominic had stolen was time. Years of Elijah's life spent believing he wasn't good enough, wasn't worthy, wasn't capable of creating something meaningful. But Maya had given that time back to him. Not by fixing the past, but by making the present beautiful enough that the past didn't matter anymore. After the showcase, they went out for ice cream, the three of them. Maya chattered excitedly about the performance, about the other acts she'd loved, about the judge, who'd said her song was remarkably mature for her age. Rachel looked at Elijah over Maya's head and mouthed, "Thank you." He nodded, because they were both trying finally to do right by this child they'd created. It wasn't the family either of them had imagined when they'd gotten married all those years ago, but it was a family nonetheless. 6 months passed. Elijah kept working at the warehouse, but he started teaching piano lessons on the side. Just a few students at first, kids from Maya's school whose parents had heard about the song she'd performed. Then more students. Then enough that he was able to cut back his warehouse shifts to part-time. The music was back in his life, not as a source of pain, but as a source of joy and income and purpose. One Saturday afternoon, while Elijah was teaching a lesson to a shy 10-year-old boy who was struggling with hand positioning, his phone buzzed with an email from an address he didn't recognize. He finished the lesson, said goodbye to the student and his mother, and opened the email. It was from a music producer in New York. "Mr. Brooks, my name is Sarah Chen, and I attended the district music showcase where your daughter performed Tomorrow's Here. I was there scouting for new talent, and I have to say your song stopped me in my tracks. The melody, the lyrics, the emotional honesty of the piece. It's exactly the kind of authentic music we're looking for at Horizon Records. I'd love to discuss the possibility of recording and releasing Tomorrow's Here, and possibly other original compositions of yours. Would you be available for a phone call this week?" Elijah read the email 3 times, certain he was misunderstanding something. A record label wanted to release his music. His music that he'd written with his 8-year-old daughter in a tiny apartment on a piano that was older than he was. He called Maya into the room. "Baby girl, you need to see this." Maya read the email, her eyes growing wider with each sentence. "Daddy, does this mean we're going to be famous? I don't know about famous. But it means someone thinks our song is good enough to share with the world. Are you going to call her? I don't know. This is all pretty sudden." Maya looked at him with those big brown eyes that could still melt his heart from across a room. "Daddy, remember what you told me when I was scared to perform at the talent show? You said that when you have something beautiful to share, you have to be brave enough to share it, even if you're scared." Elijah laughed. "Using my own advice against me, huh? Is it working?" "Yeah, baby girl, it's working." He called Sarah Chen that evening. The conversation was surreal. She talked about recording contracts and studio time, and marketing strategies like these were normal things that happened to people like him. But she also talked about his music with a passion and understanding that made him trust her. "The thing that struck me about Tomorrow's Here," Sarah said, "is that it doesn't sound like it's trying to be anything other than what it is. It's honest. It's real. That's so rare in music today. Everything is overproduced, overprocessed, trying too hard to fit into some mold. Your song just is, and that authenticity is incredibly powerful. I wrote it with my daughter, Elijah admitted. She's 8. We were just trying to create something that felt true." "Well, you succeeded. Look, I don't want to pressure you, but I think you have real potential as a songwriter. And not just the one song. If you have other material, or if you're interested in writing more, I'd love to hear it." After he hung up, Elijah sat at his piano and let himself feel the weight of possibility. A record deal. The chance to share his music with the world. The opportunity to maybe finally become the artist he'd dreamed of being when he was 23 years old. But this time, it was different. This time he wasn't doing it alone, or trying to prove something to someone who'd rejected him. This time he was doing it for himself, and for his daughter, and for every person who'd ever been told they weren't good enough. His phone rang. Unknown number again, but this time he recognized the pattern. Dominic. He almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of him. "Hello, I heard your song," Dominic said, without preamble. "Tomorrow's Here." Someone sent me a recording from the showcase. Elijah: It's extraordinary. Thank you. I mean it. It's the kind of music that changes people. The kind of music I used to dream about writing before I gave up on that dream. You could still write music, you know. It's never too late. Dominic laughed, but it was sad. Maybe. I don't know. I've been doing some thinking these past few months about my life, about what makes me happy versus what makes me successful. They're not the same thing. No, they're not. I'm thinking about stepping down from the company, taking some time to figure out who I am when I'm not playing the role everyone expects me to play. That sounds healthy. Does it? It feels terrifying. A pause. I wanted you to know that hearing your music again, both songs, it's helped me. Helped me understand that maybe it's not too late to make different choices. To be brave enough to be honest about who I am. I'm glad Elijah said and meant it. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted to say thank you for writing music that reaches people, for being the kind of person who keeps creating beautiful things even when life tries to break you. After Dominic hung up, Elijah realized something profound. He didn't feel anger anymore when he thought about Dominic. He didn't feel the old ache of rejection or the bitterness of might-have-beens. He felt compassion for a man who'd spent his whole life being what other people wanted him to be. For a person who was just now at 50 years old, starting to figure out who he really was. And he felt gratitude, because Dominic's rejection, as painful as it had been, had led him here. To this moment, to this life, to Maya and music, and the opportunity to share his art with the world. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you ends up being the thing that saves you. 3 months later, Elijah and Maya were in a professional recording studio in New York City. The space was intimidating at first, all gleaming equipment, and people who spoke in technical jargon Elijah didn't understand. But Sarah Chen was there, warm and encouraging, making sure they felt comfortable and supported. Remember, she said before they started, "This is your song. We're just helping you capture it the way you hear it in your head. If something doesn't feel right, speak up." They recorded Tomorrow's Here first with Maya singing and Elijah playing piano. It took 17 takes to get it right, not because they were playing it wrong, but because the emotion kept overwhelming them. By take 15, they were both crying, and Sarah had to call a break so they could compose themselves. "This is the real deal," she said, handing them tissues. "The emotion you're feeling that's going to come through in the recording. That's what makes it special." Take 17 was the one. Elijah could feel it the moment they finished. Everything had aligned, the technical perfection and the emotional truth, all coming together in a way that felt magical. Sarah played it back for them, and Elijah heard his daughter's voice and his piano intertwining into something that was greater than the sum of its parts. "That's it," Sarah said quietly. "That's the one." They recorded 3 more of Elijah's songs that week. One he'd written recently, one from college that he'd never performed for anyone, and a brand new one he'd composed specifically for this album. The album was going to be called When Tomorrow Comes, named after the first song he'd written all those years ago. Sarah had insisted on including it, even though it meant Elijah had to record something so deeply personal he'd never imagined sharing it publicly. "It's the cornerstone," Sarah explained. "It's where your journey as an artist began, and now you're reclaiming it, taking ownership of it in a new way. That's powerful." Recording When Tomorrow Comes was the hardest thing Elijah had ever done musically. Every note felt weighted with memory. Every phrase brought back images of Dominic, of that practice room, of the heartbreak that had nearly destroyed him. But it also felt like catharsis. like he was finally putting that ghost to rest once and for all, transforming private pain into public art alchemy of the highest order. When he finished recording it, the studio was silent for a long moment. Then Sarah said, "That was breathtaking. Absolutely breathtaking." Maya, who'd been listening in the booth, ran out and hugged him. "I'm so proud of you, Daddy." The album was scheduled to release in 3 months' time to coincide with a small promotional tour Sarah had arranged. Nothing huge, just performances at intimate venues in a few cities, a chance for Elijah to share his music live with audiences. "I want to warn you," Sarah said during a meeting about the release strategy. "When this album comes out, your life is going to change. Maybe not overnight, maybe not dramatically, but it will change. People are going to want to know your story. They're going to ask about the songs, about the inspiration, about your journey." "I don't know if I'm ready for that," Elijah admitted. "No one ever is. But here's what I tell all my artists: you control the narrative. You decide how much to share and how much to keep private. Your music is public, but your life doesn't have to be." Elijah nodded, but he knew it wasn't that simple. The moment When Tomorrow Comes was released, people would want to know who it was written for. They'd ask questions, they'd dig into his past, and eventually they might figure out the truth. Was he ready for that? Was he ready for the world to know that he'd written a love song for another man, that his heartbreak had been queer heartbreak, that his story didn't fit the neat heterosexual narrative most people expected? He thought about it for a long time. And then he realized that hiding who he was, hiding the truth of his experience, would betray everything the music stood for. The whole point was authenticity, honesty, being brave enough to be real. If he couldn't do that with his own story, what right did he have to ask his listeners to connect with his art? He called Sarah back. "When people ask about the inspiration for When Tomorrow Comes, I'm going to tell them the truth. All of it. I'm not going to hide who I am or who I loved or why the song matters. Are you sure? Once you say it publicly, you can't take it back, I'm sure. If my music is going to mean something, it has to come from a place of truth. And the truth is, I'm a gay black man who fell in love with someone I couldn't have, who spent 15 years running from his own identity, who almost lost himself completely before his daughter taught him how to be brave again. That's my story, and I'm not ashamed of it anymore." "Then we'll support you completely," Sarah said. "Whatever you need, we're here." The weeks leading up to the album release were a blur of interviews and photo shoots and promotional appearances. Elijah had never experienced anything like it. People actually caring about his music, wanting to hear what he had to say, treating him like his art mattered. Maya came with him to most of it when school allowed. She was his good luck charm, his reminder of why he was doing this, his anchor to reality when everything started feeling surreal. 1 week before release, Elijah did an interview with a prominent music journalist who'd been following his story. "So tell me about When Tomorrow Comes," the journalist said. "It's such an emotionally raw song. Who was it written for?" Elijah took a breath. This was it. The moment where he either told the truth or spent the rest of his career hiding. "I wrote it for a man I loved when I was 23 years old," Elijah said steadily. "A man who broke my heart because he was afraid to be who he really was. And I get it now, that fear, because I spent a long time being afraid too. Afraid that being gay and black in America meant I couldn't have the life I wanted. Afraid that loving men made me less of a father or less of a man. But my daughter taught me that love is love, that being authentic is the only way to live, and that hiding who you are doesn't protect you, it just makes you smaller." The journalist nodded slowly. "That's incredibly brave to say publicly." "Maybe. Or maybe it's just long overdue." When the interview published, the response was overwhelming. Messages flooded in from people thanking him for his honesty, from queer kids who'd never heard a story like his in mainstream music from other artists who'd been afraid to be open about their identities. There was also backlash, of course, hate messages and threats, and all the ugliness that comes with being visibly queer in a world that still has work to do. But it was manageable, and more importantly, it was honest. Elijah had finally stopped hiding, and it felt like freedom. The album When Tomorrow Comes was released on a Tuesday in March. It didn't debut at #1 or break any records, but it sold steadily, and more importantly, it connected with people. Reviews praised its raw emotional honesty and refreshing authenticity. Playlists added it. Radio stations played it. People shared it. And slowly, Elijah's life transformed. He was able to quit the warehouse entirely supporting himself through music teaching lessons, doing small performances, and the modest but real income from album sales and streaming. It wasn't wealth, not by any measure, but it was enough. More than enough. Maya was thriving. She'd become something of a minor celebrity at her school, and while Elijah worried about that going to her head, she remained grounded and sweet and focused on her music. Rachel had even started dating someone new, a kind man who worked as a high school teacher and who didn't try to compete with Elijah for Maya's affection. They were building something healthy, finally a co-parenting relationship based on mutual respect rather than resentment. Everything was against all odds working out. And then 3 months after the album released, Elijah got a call from an unknown number. "Hello, Elijah. It's Dominic. I know I probably shouldn't be calling, but I just finished listening to your album. The whole thing start to finish. I had to tell you it's extraordinary. Every song, every note. You've become the artist you were always meant to be." Elijah felt that familiar tightness in his chest, but it wasn't painful anymore. Just bittersweet. "Thank you. That means a lot. I read the interview you did, the one where you talked about writing When Tomorrow Comes for a man you loved. I know that man was me." "Yeah, it was. I need to tell you something." Dominic's voice was thick with emotion. "Hearing your music, hearing you talk about your journey, it gave me the courage to do something I should have done 25 years ago. I came out, to my family, to my friends, to the board of my company. I told everyone the truth about who I am." Elijah's breath caught. "Dominic, my parents didn't take it well. I've been cut off from the family fortune, written out of the will, all the things I was terrified would happen when I was younger. But you know what? It doesn't matter. Because for the first time in my life, I'm free. I'm actually free to be myself." How do you feel? Terrified? Relieved? Hopeful? All of it at once. A pause. "I'm not calling to ask for anything, Elijah. I'm not expecting forgiveness or reconciliation or anything like that. I just wanted you to know that your music changed my life. It gave me permission to stop hiding. And for that, I'll be forever grateful." "I'm glad you found that courage," Elijah said, honestly. "Everyone deserves to live their truth, even if it comes 25 years too late. Better late than never." They talked for another 20 minutes, catching up on the details of their lives, finding a tentative friendship in the ashes of their old heartbreak. It wasn't romance. That door was closed, and would stay closed. But it was healing for both of them. Before they hung up, Dominic said, "Would you ever consider getting coffee sometime just as friends? I'd like to hear more about your music, about Maya. I'd like to know the man you've become." Elijah thought about it. A year ago, even 6 months ago, he would have said no. But he wasn't that scared, angry person anymore. "Yeah," he said, "I think I'd like that." 2 weeks later, they met at a coffee shop in downtown Boston, not far from where the conservatory used to be. Dominic looked different, less polished, more relaxed. He wore jeans and a simple button-down shirt, no designer labels or expensive watch. His face had lines that hadn't been there before, but they were laugh lines, not stress lines. "You look good," Elijah said, and meant it. "So do you. Happy. You look happy." They ordered coffee and sat by the window watching the city go by, and talked like two people getting to know each other for the first time. Dominic told him about stepping down as CEO, about the fallout with his family, about the freedom of not having to pretend anymore. He talked about going back to music, taking piano lessons again, rediscovering the joy he'd lost so long ago. Elijah told him about Maya's progress, about the album, about his teaching practice, about the small but meaningful life he'd built from the wreckage of his broken dreams. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if I'd been braver back then?" Dominic asked. "If I'd said yes that night in the practice room?" "Sometimes," Elijah admitted, "but not as much anymore. Because if things had been different, I wouldn't have Maya, and she's the best thing in my life. So maybe everything happened exactly the way it needed to." Dominic smiled, sad but accepting. "Maybe you're right. They didn't become close friends. The history between them was too complicated for that. But they maintained contact, occasional texts, the rare coffee meeting, the acknowledgement that they'd both survived the damage they'd done to each other and come out better on the other side." It was enough. 6 months after the album released, Elijah stood backstage at the Apollo Theater in Harlem, preparing for the biggest performance of his life. The album had done well enough that Sarah had booked him for a headline show at this legendary venue, the place where so many great artists had launched their careers, the place where dreams came true. Maya was with him, dressed in her performance outfit, ready to join him for tomorrow's Here. "You nervous, Daddy?" "Terrified," Elijah admitted. "Me too. But we've got this. Together." "Together," Elijah echoed. The stage manager gave him the 5-minute warning. Elijah could hear the crowd beyond the curtain, hundreds of people who'd paid to hear his music, who'd connected with his songs, who believed in his art. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, the heartbreak, the struggle, the years of believing he wasn't good enough, the moment when his daughter asked to learn piano, and everything changed. He thought about Dominic and Rachel and all the people who'd shaped his path for better or worse. He thought about his mother, who'd worked herself to exhaustion to pay for piano lessons she couldn't afford, who'd believed in him when no one else did. And he thought about music, about how it had saved him, broken him, and ultimately helped him become whole again. "Ladies and gentlemen," he heard the announcer say, "please welcome to the stage Elijah Brooks." The curtain rose. The lights blazed. Elijah walked out to thunderous applause. Maya's hand in his and sat down at the grand piano in the center of the stage. He looked out at the sea of faces, all those people waiting to hear his story told through music. And he began to play. The opening notes of When Tomorrow Comes filled the theater, and this time when Elijah played the song that had defined his heartbreak for so many years, he felt only peace, because tomorrow had finally arrived. And it was beautiful.